21. Ravenclaw's flying class. At 5 in the afternoon, students from Hufflepuff and Ravenclaw filed out onto the flying class lawn. From there, you could see Hagrid's hut and the Forbidden Forest in the distance, and sometimes odd noises drifted over from that direction. Unlike the adventure-hungry Gryffindors or the troublemaking Slytherins, Ravenclaws understood the value of self-preservation and usually tested things within the rules. Hufflepuffs were well-behaved and wouldn't break them on purpose. Most pupils from these two houses wouldn't set foot in the Forbidden Forest until they were 7th years. About 20 broomsticks lay neatly on the grass, and Madame Hooch was already waiting, watching the students with a hawk-like gaze, sharp and exacting. "I suppose you heard about yesterday's accident," she said sternly. "Longbottom from Gryffindor was lucky to break only his wrist. If any of you act recklessly, it wouldn't surprise me if someone broke their neck. Keep that in mind." The Ravenclaws and Hufflepuffs nodded obediently. "All right, stand next to a broom," Madame Hooch ordered. Under her watchful eye, everyone moved quickly, without scrambling. The school's brooms were of uncertain age. Each looked very old, with twigs jutting out and rough oak handles, too coarse even for sweeping. Yet, they were the ones the students were expected to fly. Veed suddenly thought that flying on a broom might not be very comfortable for his tailbone. He heard Michael mutter, "Comet, the cheapest model." Veed glanced over. Michael's broom looked even worse than his own, tied together as if with weeds. Madame Hooch called out, "Hold out your right hand, place it over the handle, and say, 'Up! Up!'" the students shouted together. Veed's broom rolled twice across the grass before launching into his hand. He grabbed it and felt that he didn't need to grip hard. The broom seemed to float up by itself. Some students succeeded immediately. Others, Michael among them, had brooms that bounced on the ground like dead fish and took ages to reach their hands. Once everyone had their broom, Madame Hooch showed them how to mount without falling and corrected improper sitting postures. Veed had assumed mounting a broom would be simple. He'd seen Harry Potter in the films casually straddle a broom and take off. But reality was different. A broom handle is just a thin stick, and keeping one's balance required technique. Fortunately, the brooms were charmed so that riding them felt somewhat like sitting on a chair, not exactly comfortable, but bearable. Only when everyone's posture met her standards did Madame Hooch let them proceed to flying. "When I blow the whistle, push off the ground," she instructed. "Hold tight to your brooms, but don't fly too high unless you want to disappear into the clouds. Rise just a little, glide forward slowly, then come back down gently." She repeated slowly 3 times, then counted down for the whistle, 3, 2, 1. When the whistle blew, the class immediately scattered. Some went too high, some plunged toward the ground, and 2 students lost their balance and tumbled off their brooms with a thud. Madame Hooch frowned and waved her wand. Thankfully, no one was badly hurt. Then a scream cut through the air. A Ravenclaw girl was streaking toward the broom shed. "Obstacles!" Madame Hooch shouted. The girl stalled for a moment, and although she still struck the wall, the impact was lessened. Her broom shattered on impact. Instead of scolding, Madame Hooch summoned another old broom with Accio so the girl could continue practicing. Veed circled higher, testing the broom and gradually increasing his speed. Only 5 or 6 students, himself included, managed to gain steady control. Madame Hooch ordered most of the others not to fly above the height of the broom shed. Even so, accidents were constant. 2 brooms wobbled and collided midair. A Hufflepuff boy who flew well at low altitude closed his eyes as soon as he rose a few meters and fell off. He had vertigo. The first flying lesson was, to put it mildly, chaotic. Madame Hooch was everywhere at once, her wand flicking as she rescued students from situations that could have easily snapped a neck. A reckless pupil even collided with her. Her face went ashen with anger, and she docked 5 points from Hufflepuff. Veed understood then why Madame Hooch always looked sour. Any patient instructor teaching a string of clumsy beginners would react the same way. Finally, the lesson ended, and groups of students went to the infirmary for treatment, scrapes, sprains, and a few fainting spells. Veed and Michael were unhurt and walked back to the Great Hall for dinner together. "Veed," Hermione called, waving as she sat at one end of the Gryffindor table. Veed strode over and sat down. Hermione looked them over. Flying class went badly? Exhausting, Michael said, utterly worn out. He needed food and grabbed 2 slices of buttered bread and a roasted chicken leg. Veed poured himself a glass of juice and drank it in one go. It was everyone's first time, he said. Most people were clumsy. More than half the class ended up with minor injuries and a few fainted. Hermione nodded. I'm not surprised. Flying without proper protection, you're going to get hurt. She clearly didn't care for brooms or Quidditch. It's a skill that takes real practice. Good Quidditch players can fly more nimbly than small birds. After the lesson, Michael seemed to have some energy back. Vede, however, remembered how he'd kept to low altitude. The moment he tried to go higher, the broom, or perhaps Michael sitting on his broom, would begin to tremble. He was one of those people who were bad at something, but loved it anyway. Michael tried to convince him with a single persuasive line. Think about it, Vede, he said, grinning. We could fly straight to our dorms and never climb stairs again. I've seen Quidditch players do it. 22, Umbrella House and SSC all day, until he returned to the dormitory to sleep. Vede couldn't think of anything but flying brooms. That night, he dreamed he was gliding on a broom, free as a bird, sweeping over Hogwarts Castle, over the Quidditch pitch, over the Forbidden Forest and the Black Lake. He circled the lawn, dipped through the castle corridors, and everyone looked up in surprise. Michael hung half dead on the stairs, exhausted and glazed-eyed, but Vade kept well away from those cursed steps. He drew a graceful arc through the air, slipped through a window, and landed lightly on his own bed. When he woke, the wonderful sensation of flight lingered. He lay staring at the ceiling with a hollow feeling, unable to fall back asleep. First years weren't allowed to bring brooms to school, and a Nimbus 2000 cost at least 1,000 galleons. Vede Grey's father, Ferdinand, owned a toy factory that sold goods to the United States, so the family was reasonably well off for ordinary folk. Vede had a comfortable allowance and could buy snacks whenever he wanted, but he couldn't imagine asking his parents for 1,000 galleons for what they'd see as a toy. If only he could earn his own money, he thought. In the Muggle world, he could have turned his knowledge of the future into quick wealth. But as a boarding school student, how could he make money? He let his imagination run wild. Saturday was a full day off. When Veda arrived at the practice room that morning, Hermione was already there. Of the group, she spent the most time in the practice room. Vede sometimes read in the Ravenclaw common room or stayed in the dormitory because he didn't want to go downstairs, but Hermione seemed to live in the practice room. Vede guessed she had no friends in Gryffindor besides Neville, with whom she exchanged a few words. Her relations with the other girls in her dormitory looked strained. They always moved together, classes, meals, even trips to the bathrooms, but Hermione was always on her own. Vede didn't try to persuade her to be more social. Some people simply lacked emotional finesse, and he wasn't the sort to force himself to please others. Today, though, she wasn't studying. Hermione was hammering something onto the wall. Curious, Vede leaned closer. It was a rectangular wooden board decorated simply with a line of cursive carved across it. Umbrella House? Vede read aloud, a strange expression on his face. The name reminded him of the Umbrella Corporation from Muggle stories that created biological threats and ruined the world. Yes, Hermione tapped the final nail home. There are a lot of practice rooms, but this one is ours. I thought it should have a special name. That way, when others hear Umbrella House, they won't know exactly where it is. All right. Vede shrugged. He wasn't much for fuss over names. He pulled a book from the shelf, sat down, and started his herbology homework from the day before. The practice room, Umbrella House, had changed a lot since they first arrived. Each of them had staked out a spot along the wall. Bookshelves lined the perimeter, and each desk area had been personalized. Hermione's shelf was full of books, several borrowed from the library and not yet returned. A thick stack of fresh parchment, 2 bottles of ink, and 7 or 8 quills sat ready. She went through supplies quickly. Since parchment was expensive, Hermione usually kept her notes in notebooks bought from Muggle shops. The Grangers weren't poor, but Hermione was frugal and disliked waste. Vede's shelf held all the notes he'd compiled so far. Michael and the others borrowed them all the time. claiming Vedi's notes alone could get them through finals without attending class. Scattered around were common transfiguration props, buttons, matches, chess pieces. After flying class, a miniature broom model had quietly appeared on his desk. Michael's corner was gaudy: perfume, a mirror, gift boxes, and chocolate. A Quidditch star poster was stuck on the wall. On his desk sat a dragon model, leftover cookies, and a collection of odd badges. Michael made it clear he wasn't a Ravenclaw who loved studying. Theo from Hufflepuff was a favorite of Professor Sprout and excelled at herbology. His shelf held 2 neat rows of small pots: white moss, mint, marjoram, and yarrow, the plants he'd grown himself. On his desk sat a Mimbleless Mimbletonia, ugly, lumpy, and prone to spraying thick, foul liquid. To prevent accidents, Theo kept it under a glass dome. Neville admired Theo's setup and wanted one of his own, but with little pocket money, he only had 3 or 4 pitiful pots and some fertilizer. Everyone insisted the fertilizer stay in the corner of the umbrella house so it wouldn't affect their breathing. Ryan loved astronomy and had a planetary model on his desk, planets of different sizes lazily orbiting a central sun. He also collected a range of quills and colored inks, neatly arranged on his shelf. One by one, the others arrived and noticed the new sign. They all praised it. Michael thumped the table, calling Hermione clever and delighted. Though he habitually complimented every girl, Hermione's cheeks still flushed. Theo put down his satchel. "If you ask me, it's not enough to rename the practice room. We should have our own group, a unit." "Exactly," Ryan nodded. "If we keep thinking I'm Hufflepuff, he's Ravenclaw, you're Gryffindor, we'll always be split. We should be something that goes beyond houses." "It feels official all of a sudden," Michael said, excited. "What should we call ourselves? Veed?" He looked to his good friend for a suggestion. Vide, caught off guard, hesitated. After-school tutoring interest group?" "Maybe don't," Michael said flatly and turned away. "Hermione?" "Well," Hermione grew oddly nervous. "Magic Enthusiasts Club?" Michael sighed. "How is that different from Viz after-school tutoring interest group?" "Neville?" Neville stammered. I can't think of anything right now." "Theo?" Theo brightened. "How about the Sunflower Club? Sunflowers symbolize hope, sunshine, loyalty, determination, and growth. It's very fitting." Michael mulled it over. It was appropriate in every sense, but felt a little ordinary. He couldn't come up with anything better. "Ryan?" Ryan toyed with his planetary model, thought for a long moment, then said, "How about Starry Sky Chasers? SSC for short." Michael clapped and cheered. "Cool!" Chapter 23, Jokes and Secrets. By giving themselves an official name, the little group that had first come together by accident suddenly felt permanent. They hashed out rules. New members had to be approved by everyone. No one could damage another's belongings. SSC members should protect each other from professors or other students, and so on. Veed had thought it would be more casual, a handful of friends who could meet when they liked and disappear when they didn't. So why make rules? But everyone else took it deadly seriously, and Vede felt a strange thrill. For the first time since arriving, it felt like he'd actually joined something secret and important. Rue was used as an antidote in ancient Greece and wasn't rediscovered until the 16th century. Its medicinal properties include: extracts from the stems and leaves can expel toxins. Its pollen repels the poisonous gas a basilisk emits. Rue is widely cultivated. The correct method is, during cultivation, one must pay attention to. Vidi finished the last line on his parchment and rolled it up. He'd already done all the rest of his homework the day he finished class. Herbology had been the last to complete. Hermione leaned over, eyes sharp. "Vidi, have you finished your homework?" "Yes." There was something urgent in her voice. She lowered her head and pulled him to the far side of the classroom. Veed flicked his wand and murmured, "Muffliato." Even if they spoke loudly, to everyone else, it would be nothing but a soft buzzing. Hermione's face was worried. Something happened 2 afternoons ago. Malfoy challenged Harry to a duel at midnight in the trophy room. I knew at once he was up to no good. He's not brave enough to face someone fairly. But Harry and Ron ignored me, all for a bit of boyish pride. They didn't even think about how many house points they might lose if they were caught. They didn't care about Gryffindor at all. She took a breath to steady herself and went on, lower now. "We were lucky. We almost weren't. I was trying to stop them and ended up locked out of the common room. I had to go with them. But Malfoy never went to the trophy room. He'd tipped off Filch. That rat! Veed leaned forward at the important word. You? He asked. Yes. Hermione's voice was full of disgust. Then, while we were running away, we broke into a locked room. She dropped her voice even further. Vede, do you remember what Professor Dumbledore said at the start of the year? Veed blinked. Dumbledore's speech hadn't been long. The most memorable bit was the silly shout-out to the audience. Nitwit, blubber, oddment, tweak, he offered. Hermione rolled her eyes. Not that. He said, all who do not wish to suffer a most painful death should not go to the third-floor corridor, Veed supplied, then remembered himself. You went to the fourth floor? What did you see? Hermione swallowed. Her face still held the shadow of fright. A Cerberus, as big as a house. Veed stared. How did you get away? He'd read about enormous guard dogs in a few grim volumes. The creature in the castle wasn't the classical hellhound, but its jaws were strong enough to crush bone, its venom corrosive. A bite from it would be hard to heal. It didn't react at first, Hermione said. Then it roared and lunged. It almost ate us. Her hands clenched. Her voice trembled. That school would put something so dangerous inside Hogwarts. Even if it's guarding something, what if a reckless student breaks in? Don't they think about ordinary students' safety? Veed tried to cut the tension with a joke, but it came out sharper than he meant. Maybe a magic school has a death quota. A few students dying every year keeps the rest in line. Hermione's horror was immediate. She grabbed her face. There's such a thing, she murmured, eyes wide. I didn't see that in Hogwarts, a history. Oh, of course, they wouldn't put that sort of thing in a book. It's too terrifying. How could the Ministry allow it? Seeing her on the verge of tears, Vade's tone changed. He hadn't expected the remark to land so badly. He held up his hands. I'm sorry. I was only joking. Don't take it seriously. Hermione stared for a long beat, brown eyes glistening. Guilt sank into Veed. He hadn't meant to scare her. He'd only wanted to lighten things. I'm sorry, he said again, sincere. I saw you were scared and thought I could make you laugh. It was a bad joke. I'm an idiot. Please don't be angry. Hermione stayed silent for a while, too cross to answer. After practice ended and most of the others had left, Vede kept apologizing until she finally softened. She looked down and said in a small voice, I know people don't really like me, but I consider you a friend. Don't tease me like everyone else. Something in him melted. He held up 2 fingers like an oath. I promise, it won't happen again. Hermione studied his face, then relaxed into a faint smile. A joke is only a joke if both people find it funny, she whispered. I'll remember that, Veda replied, ashamed that such a simple truth had to be pointed out by an 11-year-old. Hermione's expression became gentler. Okay, I'm not angry anymore. She cleared her throat and steered the conversation back. About the Cerberus, I was thinking of talking to Professor McGonagall. You want to tell McGonagall about the Cerberus? Veed understood immediately what she meant. Hermione ran her fingers through hair that was already mussed. Yes, the door was only locked. An Alohomora and any curious student could open it. I want to suggest sealing it with stronger magic, but if I tell on it, we could get in trouble for breaking rules. Vade thought for a moment, then offered another possibility. Maybe the door was left easy to open on purpose, he said. 24. Purchasing on behalf, Hermione's eyes widened as understanding dawned. She trembled. So, it's that. Exactly, Vede said. It's Harry Potter. The death mark, Hermione blurted. They stared at each other for a beat. Harry Potter? She repeated, incredulous. I already told you it was a joke, Vede said helplessly. Hermione frowned as the pieces fell into place. No wonder, she whispered. Percy, the Gryffindor prefect, a fifth-year Weasley, said Professor Dumbledore always explained why students weren't allowed somewhere. But this time, he just said not to go into the corridor on the right side of the 4th floor, and didn't give a reason. If he'd said there was a Cerberus hiding there, even the Weasley twins wouldn't go looking for trouble, much less a first-year like Potter, Vade said, unsurprised. Vague warnings are meant to tempt curious Gryffindors. Dumbledore probably left a test. He thought of Harry's first-year adventure, a real-life, level-breaking game where Harry and his friends used cleverness and the skills they had to overcome a challenge, and in the end, Harry used the magic of love to defeat the final boss, Lord Voldemort. The books got darker and heavier as they went on, but the first still felt full of childish fun. The schemes seemed naive and almost benevolent, as if Voldemort had laid himself out for Harry's education. How could he do that? Hermione's fear turned to anger. People could die. Is that okay? Does he not care about Harry at all? Then did you break in and get hurt by the Cerberus? Veed shot back. Not really, Hermione said, but that's because it initially... She stopped, then the fog of confusion cleared. I think, and this is only a guess, Dumbledore must have placed limits on the Cerberus so it wouldn't actually kill students who wandered in, only scare them. But if someone tried to go further, it wouldn't just stand by. Veedy finished, choosing his words carefully. I saw it standing over a trapdoor, Hermione added. It must be guarding something. If that's true, Veed said, then Harry Potter will almost certainly discover what it's guarding. After that conversation, everything seemed to slow down. Hermione, angry at Harry and Ron, wasn't paying attention to much else, so no new information came from her. Veed, however, wasn't worried. He trusted that Dumbledore had things under control. Compared to the mystery of Harry's adventures, Veedy was more focused on his charm's progress. In a recent practice session, he'd realized that the guide arc he saw when leading others also appeared when he looked in the mirror, which let him correct his wand work quickly. That discovery sped up his lessons considerably. Veed also set aside time for potions. The shelves behind the potions classroom held many common ingredients available for practice, but thanks to Professor Snape, most students avoided the dungeon outside of class, even many Slytherins. Veed sneaked down in his free periods to brew. Snape largely turned a blind eye, offering sarcastic corrections now and then. If one could ignore the professor's barbs, there was much to learn. Veed was glad he'd been sorted into Ravenclaw. Had he been a Gryffindor, Snape might have chased him out the first day. One afternoon, he managed to brew a batch of wound-cleansing potion well enough to earn a barely usable from Snape, who then told him to take it to Madame Pomfrey in the school infirmary. With Quidditch season about to begin, Madame Pomfrey would have plenty to do. On his return to Umbrella House from the infirmary, Veedy found everyone buzzing with excitement. They were all gathered around Theo, and even Hermione had her book set aside. She was calculating measurements aloud. I want 3 feet of parchment, 5 bottles of ink. I've heard there's a good quick notes quill. If they have it, I'll buy 2. Theo scribbled everything down as Michael chimed in loudly. Oh, come on, Hermione. I know you love studying, but life can't be all work. Buy something fun. Honeyduke's sweets are amazing. The exploding super bubblegum fills a room with bluebell-colored bubbles. Girls love it. Fizzing Whizbees are always popular, and there's butterbeer at the 3 Broomsticks. Who can resist a pint? Hermione hesitated, then relented. Fine, add a galleon's worth of candy, but no cockroach clusters. She knew it would be awkward bringing sweets back to the girls' dormitory. They'd be interrogated and probably mocked, but she could keep the treats at Umbrella House to share with the SSC group. What is all this about? Veedy asked curiously as he moved closer. You're finally back, Neville greeted him. We've all been waiting for you. This week is the first Hogsmeade weekend. Students in their 3rd year and up can go to Hogsmeade. I know, Veed said, but what does that have to do with us first years? It usually wouldn't, Michael said excitedly, but Theo heard that a 3rd-year Hufflepuff would help buy things for younger students. He even made a Hogsmeade goods list. Theo and Ryan said they could add whatever we want. Veedy took the list and scanned it. Who's doing this? Is he doing it as a favor or for a profit? Ryan shook his head. No, he's not trying to make money. Veed blinked. What did you say his name was? Cedric, Ryan said. Cedric Diggory. He's the top of 3rd year. Almost every Hufflepuff likes him. 25. Bertie Bott's every flavor beans. Veed didn't ask any more questions. He simply glanced at the shopping list. Hogsmeade was a small village, nowhere near the bustle of Diagon Alley, but it had all the essentials. Clothing shops, quill makers, magic suppliers, a post office, pubs, tea shops, and most importantly to students, a sweet shop. The list of confectionery items on their paper was longer than everything else put together. He looked at what everyone else wanted and couldn't help asking, can one person actually carry all of that? In the Hufflepuff common room, Cedric specifically said, Theo chuckled. He said, "Don't worry about whether my arms can carry it. There's always the levitation charm." Other third years had offered to help too. "We won't let Cedric do it alone," Ryan added. Michael flopped onto the table and sighed dramatically. "Why don't Ravenclaw seniors ever do that for us? They just give you a sideways look and say, 'You'll be able to do it in 2 years,' or 'It's for your own safety.' Not a single one volunteered to bring us back candy. I should have been a Hufflepuff." Theo and Ryan exchanged a look of shared pride. Hermione and Neville thought instead of their own house, Percy Weasley, the prefect who insisted people listen to him, or the Weasley twins in third year, forever hawking dung bombs and Peruvian instant darkness powder until Percy caught them reselling pranks for profit. Hermione and Neville, both on the fringes of Gryffindor in different ways, swallowed their complaints and envied the easy camaraderie in Hufflepuff. Veed smiled. "Michael, don't go envying Hufflepuff just because they have a senior who'll fetch sweets. When we get to third year, will you volunteer to buy every Ravenclaw candy on the list?" "Are you kidding?" Michael said without hesitation. "Too much trouble. I won't spend my weekend running errands." "So, Ravenclaws are self-centered," Veed said calmly. He picked some items others hadn't chosen, planning to swap them later. Secretly, he wondered whether Cedric would be overwhelmed by Theo's and Ryan's long list. After study that day, Theo stayed behind and said something that made Veed pause. "Actually, Veed, you're a lot like Cedric." Veed blinked. He'd been distracted, still practicing Petrificus Totalis in his head. Theo met his gaze earnestly. "The reason our study group came together was because of you. You always help us practice spells without asking for anything, and you share those notes you laboriously organize. I haven't seen another Ravenclaw do that." Veed stared at him, unsure how to respond. "Michael and Hermione are brilliant," Theo went on. "They joined us because of you. Me, Ryan, and Neville, we weren't doing very well in some subjects, but your help has started to get us house points. Professor Flitwick's praised us a few times, and Neville even raised his hand in herbology last week. Professor Sprout gave him an extra point." Theo finished simply. "You're a Ravenclaw, Veedy, but not the selfish, aloof kind. You've helped us a lot. I just wanted to tell you that." After Theo left, Veed felt a strange warmth that lingered. He packed his bag and stepped out of Umbrella House. Portraits strolled on the lawn. Claudia, usually silent, wandered with a melancholy look that reminded him uncannily of Lynn Dayu from a memory he couldn't quite place. Claudia never spoke to students or visited other portraits. She stayed on the empty lawn like a portrait that had decided to keep to herself. Cedric kept his word. He bought everything on their list and charged no extra nuts. "Oh my goodness, I'm flying!" Hermione squealed after taking a sip of a fizzy beverage from the sweet shop. The brown-haired girl had only had one glass when she began to float slowly off the ground. Veed reached out and caught her before she drifted too high and risked falling. After a few tense moments, the drink's magic wore off, and Hermione floated back down, a little breathless. "They should put consumption warnings on the label," she declared, half annoyed, half delighted. "How fun, Hermione," Michael grinned. Hermione flushed. "But I'm wearing a skirt," she snapped. Michael immediately looked abashed. "Sorry, you're absolutely right. Everyone look," Theo called, holding up a black, spicy-looking candy. "I'm going to try a black pepper imp." They watched as he popped it in, chewed, and then, on the next breath, breathed a small plume of fire from his nose. Laughter erupted around the group. Michael grabbed a packet of Bertie Bott's every flavor beans and began handing them out with a conspiratorial gleam. "Come on, try these. Let's bet who gets the worst flavor." He was the first to try. "Not bad, carrot," he announced. Ryan chewed, winced, and declared, "Unlucky, earwax." He sounded oddly convinced. Veed frowned. "How do you know what earwax tastes like?" Ryan froze, then looked anywhere but at Veed and said, "Hurry up. It's your turn, Theo." Theo popped one in with a wide grin. Melon. Lucky me." Hermione tried one and made a polite face. "Beef. Not terrible. Not great." Neville eyed his yellow bean warily. "It won't always be me who's unlucky, will it?" he muttered. He swallowed with his eyes shut, then stuck out his tongue and bellowed, "Water! Water!" "Did you get sand?" Michael teased, handing him a glass. Neville downed it, tears in his eyes, and gasped, "No, chili. Really spicy chili." All eyes turned to Veed. He had avoided Bertie Bott's beans his whole life after hearing rumors that the company occasionally mixed in vomit-flavored beans as a prank. He wrinkled his nose but didn't want to be the only one left out. After a moment's brace, he popped the bean into his mouth. "What flavor is it?" his friends asked. Ved tasted the bean, smiled, and said softly, "It tastes like snow." Regardless of the reason, spending more time together subtly changes relationships. Some people grow closer, like Veda and his companions from SSC. Others grow more hostile, like Potter and Malfoy, whose constant bickering had become a familiar sight at Hogwarts. That evening, Vede and Michael returned to the Ravenclaw common room just before curfew. As soon as Michael stepped inside, two girls whisked him away. Tomorrow was Halloween, and the students were buzzing with excitement. There was a small party in the common room, and Michael was one of the few first years invited. During the Hogsmeade weekend, the older students had bought plenty of butterbeer, rum, and whiskey, and the place smelled intoxicating. Michael tried to pull Vade along, but Vide waved him off. He had always been disinclined to such parties. The last time he'd stayed for one, he'd watched two barely acquainted students kiss passionately on a sofa after drinking too much, while a crowd cheered and beer splashed everywhere, creating an atmosphere of debauchery. Although Vede had lived in the West for 11 years, his thinking remained reserved. He was far more cautious than his classmates about relationships and physical contact. Up in the dormitory, the room was as neat as ever. The clothes he'd changed out of the day before had been washed, ironed, and folded in the wardrobe. A pot of boiled water steamed on the desk. Vede poured himself a cup and found the temperature just right. At Hogwarts, the long tables usually offered only various fruit juices, vegetable juices, or hot chocolate, and most students drank water straight from the tanks. Vede wasn't used to that. Some time ago, he had left a tentative note with his dirty clothes asking for hot water. The next morning, he had found a pot of steaming black tea on his desk. House elves, it seemed, hadn't understood what he meant hot water, so he added another line. "Thank you for the black tea. However, what I want is hot water made by boiling clear water directly without tea leaves." From then on, whenever he returned to the dormitory, there was always a pot of water at the perfect temperature waiting for him, and the same thing happened in the morning. At least half the comfort of life at Hogwarts, he thought, came from the house elves. Before bed, he had left 3 tiny pumpkin carriages on the desk, transfigurations he'd made himself. In front of the carriages, a bean-sized lantern with a faint green glow hung suspended. He'd pinned a note to them. "To Zoe, Phil, Harvey, thank you for your dedicated service. This is a Halloween gift for you. Happy Halloween." He woke early on Halloween to the smell of roasted pumpkin throughout the castle. The miniature carriages were gone. In their place were a fresh pot of hot water, a plate of pumpkin cookies, a bunch of flowers still beaded with dew, and a pile of thumb-sized pebbles that looked like gemstones. The heart-shaped cookies were fragrant. The pebbles had been polished until they gleamed. They were thoughtful return gifts from the house elves. Vede smiled. He didn't begrudge them for being cheap. The house elves owned nothing beyond the tea towels on their backs, and even those belonged to Hogwarts. There wasn't a holiday schedule for Halloween. First thing that morning was charms. Professor Flitwick divided the students into pairs to practice the levitation charm. Vede was paired with Anthony Goldstein. "Don't forget the subtle wrist movement we've been practicing," Flitwick squeaked. "Swish and flick. Remember to pronounce the incantation correctly. Don't be like poor Barufio, who said F instead of S and ended up on the floor with a buffalo on his chest. All right, start practicing." Students chanted together, "Wingardium Leviosa." The feather in front of Vede floated immediately. He'd used the charm many times back at the Umbrella House, mostly for shifting tables and chairs. Hermione and Michael succeeded too. Flitwick clapped and awarded, "Very good, 2 points each." Then something that surprised everyone happened. Neville's feather trembled and rose, bobbing like a small boat 2 feet above his desk. The Gryffindors looked astonished. Neville was famously clumsy, and most feathers in the room lay stubbornly still. Seeing him get the levitation charm even partly right was as shocking as watching a troll do ballet. "Fantastic, fantastic, Mr. Longbottom," Flitwick cried, leaping up. 5 points to Gryffindor. Really? Longbottom actually did it? Anthony whispered in disbelief to Veed. Anthony himself tried again and again, but his feather wouldn't budge. He spoke the words correctly, but the precise swish and flick motion was eluding him. The more he practiced, the more awkward his movements became. Wait! Veed grabbed Anthony's wrist before he could jab the wand into the air in frustration. Try this. He drew a steep, sine wave-like curve on a scrap of parchment, marked the direction with arrows, and noted where the motion should speed up. He magnified the diagram and floated it in front of Anthony. Move your wand along this line. Don't go outside the bounds. Anthony didn't question him. Both were Ravenclaws and Nude's reputation in charms. He practiced once, then followed the line with his wand. Wingardium Leviosa. The feather rose immediately, higher and higher under Anthony's control, until it almost brushed the chandelier. Anthony watched with delighted surprise, reluctant to lower his wand. Terry Boot and Lavender Brown, sitting nearby, exchanged looks and reached for the parchment. Lavender, quicker than Terry, snatched it and pulled it toward her group. On the right side of the classroom, more and more feathers began to rise. Lisa Turpin had just grabbed the parchment when a small hand reached up from below and snatched it away. Professor Flitwick glanced over with a smile. "Oh, a very clever way to guide one another," he said. "But don't let it distract the rest of the class. Now, carry on." With that, the lesson continued, and the room filled with the gentle sight of feathers bobbing above many desks. 27. Alchemy and Weasley. Professor Flitwick glanced at the parchment and said, "Oh, what a clever way to guide them. It is a shortcut, but it will help you master this charm faster. Vide, this was your idea?" Veed lowered his eyes, and a bright smile crossed his face. The usually severe professor smiled back. He waved his wand and duplicated the parchment a dozen times so every group could have one, then cautioned, "This is a reference, but you must truly master it. I'll collect the sheets in 10 minutes, and I expect all of you to have the levitation charm down by then. For those who can already make feathers float, why not try to make them spin while they're in the air?" Practice resumed across the classroom as Flitwick drifted between desks, offering tips. Vade guided his feather to trace a circle one moment and a square the next, then began to recite lines of poetry under his breath. Anthony watched with a mixture of envy and admiration, but didn't push himself. He kept repeating the basic levitation until he felt confident. When class ended, the Gryffindors bundled off to History of Magic. The Ravenclaws had no more lessons that morning, and Veed headed toward the library as a matter of habit. Michael had meant to go with him, but Terry stopped him by putting an arm around his shoulders. "Hey, Michael," Terry said. "You've been slipping away after every class, right? Studying with Veed? I heard Granger and Longbottom from Gryffindor have been joining you, too." A ring of Ravenclaws turned to look, eyes bright. Michael raised his hands in a helpless gesture. "Yeah, I haven't been hiding it. What's the big deal? So Longbottom can finally get the levitation charm down. This is all your self-study?" Lisa asked. "I thought it was just group homework." "Michael, can you teach me some time?" Padma asked. "My fire-making spell still needs work." Padma was strikingly beautiful, the sort of girl whose presence made Michael a little flustered, but when it came to learning, he wouldn't claim credit he didn't deserve. "I'd be glad to show you the spells I know, Padma, but really, it's Vade who's good at teaching. We're all learning from him," Michael admitted. "Veed, that is." The circle went quiet. To the other students, Vede Grey was distant and inscrutable, handsome and serious, talented but withdrawn. He joked little, avoided games and parties, and had no interest in Quidditch. He disappeared after lessons and only showed up in the tower by curfew. While others lingered in the common room to chat and do homework, Veed was seldom seen there. The younger Ravenclaws felt an invisible barrier between themselves and him, and most of them hesitated to approach him. He kept his distance, and that alone made him intimidating. The library was hushed and nearly empty. Madame Pince sat with her eyes on a book, turning pages slowly. She glanced up when Vade came in and then returned to her reading. 2 months into the term, she already knew which first years could be trusted to behave and which needed watching to avoid noise, mishandling books, or worse. Vade was one of the few she trusted completely. Vade moved to the alchemy section. He'd recently started making time for the subject. Alchemy dealt with the magical properties, composition, and transformations of the four classical elements and materials. It overlapped with potions, charms, ancient runes, and defense against the dark arts. At Hogwarts, alchemy could only be chosen by students who'd earned a good or higher in those subjects at OWL level, which kept it out of reach for many. Still, alchemy's influence was everywhere. The never-dying candles in the Great Hall, the castle's shifting staircases, the animated portraits, door knockers that posed riddles, flying brooms, the golden snitch, the sorting hat, wizard chess, and memory spheres. Basic alchemy wasn't impossible to start. Alchemists simply liked obscure terminology and grand claims that made the field seem more daunting than it needed to be. Vade's reading comprehension had been honed over 20 years in his previous life, and he had a broad vocabulary and knowledge base to draw on. That made it possible for him to work through alchemy texts that would have baffled most first years. Lately, he'd been reading works by Nicholas Flamel, Elementary Alchemy and Analyzing Alchemy, and had moved on to the Book of the Secrets of Nature, the Fifth Element. He was turning a page when a voice interrupted him. "This is a bit early to be studying that," Fred remarked from behind. Vede looked up to find the Weasley twins standing there. George grinned. "Are you a first year then?" Fred pulled out a chair and flopped down opposite Vede. "Alchemy's a bit advanced for now, isn't it?" "But you have good taste," George said, waving his wand and muttering muffliato to keep Madame Pince from rising. "Alchemy's the most fascinating subject, only gets offered in 6th year, though." "That's a stupid decision," Fred said mock seriously. "Why isn't it available earlier?" "Because then most students would never go home for the summer," George replied with a straight face. "They'd all be in danger of getting a T, troll, on their exams." "Except for us," Fred added. "We're naturally brilliant," George chimed in. "So we started studying on our own from first year." "As your seniors," Fred said, "here's some advice, little Ravenclaw. Start with Elementary Alchemy. Nicholas Flamel's the greatest alchemist alive today. His books are worth learning from." Vede spread his hands. "I already finished that one." Fred's eyebrows shot up. "What about Analyzing Alchemy?" "I read that too." "Then on the diversity of species?" George asked. "Thomas Aquinas' 12th century treatise?" Vede hesitated. "I skimmed it, but I didn't study it closely. It doesn't seem to deal directly with magical applications." "That's because authors back then often had to publish through Muggle channels," George explained. "Anything to do with magic got written very indirectly. We recommend the 18th century revision by Esnel Vargas. He added over 200 magical species and thousands of magical materials. Much more useful." The twins spoke with the easy confidence of students who devoured dozens of alchemy texts and treated them like treasures. Vede felt as if he'd stumbled across a chest of gems. He reached for a scrap of parchment and began jotting down their recommendations. If he'd had no afternoon classes, he wouldn't have let them go. The conversation was so engrossing that when they finally parted ways moments later, none of them had bothered to exchange names. 28. Halloween Dinner. Today, we'll be learning simple transfiguration of living things, Professor McGonagall said from the front of the classroom. Chalk moved by itself across the board, writing key points as she spoke. "This is more difficult than transfiguring inanimate objects, so I need you all to pay extra close attention. Now, does anyone know what dangers there are when transfiguring living creatures?" The room was unusually quiet. No hands shot up at first. After a pause, someone hesitantly raised a hand. "Miss Mandy Brocklehurst?" McGonagall prompted. Mandy Brocklehurst from Ravenclaw stood. "There are 4 points. First, an incomplete transfiguration can cause extreme distress to the creature and make it lash out at the witch or wizard. Second, Vede scanned the classroom while Mandy spoke, but couldn't see the familiar brown-haired figure. Other Gryffindors were present, but Hermione was not. He leaned toward Michael. "Have you seen Hermione?" Michael glanced around and shrugged. "Maybe she's not feeling well and stayed in the dormitory. Professor McGonagall didn't say anything." That made sense, but Vede felt oddly unsettled. McGonagall's stern gaze swept the room, and both boys immediately fell silent. When class ended, the students poured out into the corridors. Vede pushed through the crowd until he found Harry and Ron. "Excuse me, Potter Weasley," he called. Ron took an instinctive step back. What is it, Gray? Have you seen Hermione? Vidi asked bluntly. Why didn't she come to Transfiguration? Harry looked at Ron. Ron's face closed off with something like guilt. How would I know? We're not close with Granger, Harry said defensively. Vede narrowed his eyes and stared directly at Ron. Ron avoided his gaze, pulled Harry along, and stammered, If you don't have anything else, we're going to rest. He started to drag Harry away, but Vade's voice called out behind them. Harry Potter! Harry stopped and turned. Vide stood there, expression serious. Do you really not know what happened? Under that look, Harry felt exposed. His mouth went dry. He wanted to protect his friend, but couldn't lie. Hermione, she cried after Charms class, he finally whispered. We haven't seen her since then. I'm sorry. Ron yanked Harry away and they hurried off. Vade stood a moment with his brow furrowed, trying to piece something together, but his memory felt locked. He couldn't pull anything more out of it. Michael shrugged. They must have had a quarrel. Hermione's a bit too intense sometimes. It wouldn't be surprising if she clashed with the Gryffindors. She wouldn't miss the Halloween feast. Let's go. We can ask her then. Vade nodded. Nearby, Padma Patil tapped her fingers, then hurried to catch up with her twin and leaned close to whisper something. That evening, the Great Hall had been transformed for Halloween. Giant pumpkin lanterns floated beneath the enchanted ceiling. Skeleton decorations and swags of autumn leaves lined the walls. Bats swooped and clustered in the rafters, sometimes gathering and tumbling past like a dark cloud that made the candles in the jack-o'-lantern's gutter. Students from all four houses filled nearly every seat, and the staff were arriving. Dumbledore had even changed into a Halloween-appropriate outfit, a pumpkin-colored robe with tiny bats embroidered on his hat, and he stood laughing and chatting with Professor McGonagall. Vede scanned the Gryffindor table. The house was louder than usual. The Weasley twins ran about between plates, a group of boys joked and whooped, and the general noise made it hard to concentrate. He looked long and hard, but still couldn't find Hermione. Someone suddenly patted his shoulder. Before he could turn, a faint floral scent wafted over him. Padma had moved Anthony aside and leaned in. I know where Granger is, she said. She's not at the feast? Vede asked. No. Padma pushed a stray hair from her face and whispered, Parvati told me. She's in Gryffindor, you know. Parvati said that after Charms, one of the Weasleys said something mean about Granger, that he said she was like a nightmare or something like that. Ron Weasley? Michael leaned over, surprised. He'd actually say that? Didn't Hermione hex him? She cried, Padma said. She cried in the girls' bathroom for a long time and wouldn't let anyone comfort her. Parvati got her excused from Transfiguration this afternoon. I went to the bathroom and Granger was still there. I'll go check, Vede said, standing at once. I'll come with you, Padma said eagerly. But the feast is about to start, Michael grumbled, seeing Vade stride for the doors. I didn't eat much at lunch for this meal. Still, he sighed and hurried after them. They cut through the arriving crowds. At the Gryffindor table, Harry noticed Vede leave and something cold washed over him. The cheerful Halloween mood evaporated and memories snapped back into place. Ron, he grabbed his friend's arm. Has Hermione come back yet? Ron was already thinking about roast beef and pumpkin pasties and didn't pay much attention. I don't think so. What's up? I just saw Gray and the others leave. Were they going to find Hermione? Harry asked. Maybe she gets on with them. They've gone to look for her, so don't worry. Ron waved a hand. He'd been annoyed by Hermione's lectures more than worried about her tears. The guilt he'd briefly felt earlier had already passed. A bat, nudged by Fred's wand, landed on his head, and the table erupted in laughter. Ron was busy swatting the thing away and didn't listen to Harry. Harry hesitated a moment, then stood up and ran out of the Great Hall after Vede. Dumbledore and Snape both turned to watch him go. Inside the girls' lavatory, Hermione sat hunched against the cold tile, tears soaking her robes, when two gentle knocks came at the cubicle door. Hermione, is that you? Who is it? Hermione choked. Are you here to mock me too? It's Padma Patil, came the soft reply. The Halloween feast should have started by now, Hermione. Vede and Michael are waiting outside. They're really worried. Go on to the feast. Don't worry about me. Just leave me alone for a while. Hermione wiped at her face and spoke stubbornly. She had been crying so long she felt as if the tears should have dried out. She was hiding because she couldn't face anyone. Still, hearing a friend's concern and calm words loosened something, and fresh tears sprang up. Padma put her hand against the cubicle door and whispered, "Hermione, I know what rubbish Weasley said, but I don't understand why you'd be upset by the unfair words of a foolish boy and ignore friends who actually care about you. Everyone says you're the cleverest witch in the year. Can't you tell what's important?" Hermione's sobs slowed until she was silent for a long moment. Padma continued, "Here's a secret. People who slander you behind your back are usually driven by jealousy and their own insecurities. You're better than they are in many ways, and they try to hurt you with words. If you let it break you and push your friends away, then they've won. The best thing is to ignore them, shine brighter, and stop fussing over shadows in the corner. If that doesn't work, punch him in the face. After all, you're a Gryffindor, aren't you?" There was a soft creak as the cubicle door opened. Hermione came out, eyes rimmed red, voice still shaky. "I'm not the cleverest witch. Padma, you are." Padma smiled and gave her a quick hug. Out in the corridor, Vedi and Michael had been waiting for a long time. When the two girls finally emerged from the lavatory, both relief and something like amusement showed on their faces. They had heard Padma's little speech, but said nothing about it. Michael opened his arms with a grin. "Need a warm hug, Hermione?" Hermione wiped her eyes and flung herself at Michael with a hug that looked as if it might break his ribs. When he staggered free, she turned and hugged Vidi just as fiercely. "Thank you. And I'm sorry," she murmured. Vidi just ruffled her hair without comment. "No need to apologize," he said, "but I'm desperate to get to the Halloween feast. Hope they haven't finished dessert." Michael rubbed his stomach. "If they have, we'll sneak some from the kitchens." Padma looked curious. "Where are Hogwarts kitchens? I've never seen them." Michael brightened. "They're really well hidden. If it weren't for Theo and—" Veed held up a hand to stop him, and with his other hand, quickly pointed his wand. "Did you hear that?" he hissed. They all heard it then, a faint scraping and a heavy, rasping breath. Around the corner, something enormous gripped the wall. Everyone's faces went pale. Padma made a small, choked sound. "Merlin, what is that?" A giant came into view. 12 feet tall at least, its head brushing the ceiling, weighing more than a ton. Its skin was greenish-brown and puckered like a toad's. A bloated belly, a bald head with a few scraggly hairs on a thick neck, long arms almost to its knees. It reeked. In one hand it clutched a club like a tree trunk. "A troll in the castle?" Padma whispered, legs gone rubbery. Hermione leaned against the wall for support. The troll lowered its head, spotted them, and a cruel gleam twitched in its small, bloodshot eyes. It lifted a heavy foot and started toward them, club raised. Hermione's hand shook as she pointed her wand. She didn't know what to do. Michael started firing off spells again and again. Petrificus totalis, Petrificus totalis. His efforts were futile. The spells bounced off the troll as if it were made of stone. Vedi raised his wand and sifted mentally through everything he knew. Trolls, he thought, had extremely high magical resistance and thick hides. Even powerful adult charms barely fazed them. In the textbooks, they were ranked at danger level XX, the same as thunderbirds and sphinxes. Vidi had always had doubts about that classification, but the reality of something taller than a house looming over him was terrifying all the same. A bucket suddenly thudded against the troll's head, and a voice shouted, "What are you standing there for? Run!" Harry appeared out of nowhere. The noise snapped Michael out of his daze. He grabbed the two girls and hauled them back. Veed, however, stepped forward, aimed his wand, and cried, "Avis!" From the tip of his wand flew a flock of chirping little birds that swarmed at the troll's face. The simple-minded creature was distracted, snorting and slapping at the birds with huge, clumsy hands. Seeing it work, Michael and the others tried to join in. "Avis!" But their spells sputtered, nothing but fizzling sparks. The birds Veed had conjured darted everywhere, maddening the troll, which roared and smashed nearby decorations with its club. Still, the birds began to dwindle. "This'll only hold him for 10 seconds, Michael shouted. Vedi swung his wand. "Smooth path spell." The floor beneath the troll became slick as ice. The monster lost its footing, crashed down with a ground-shaking thud, and its club went flying. Hermione, pale and trembling but finding some courage, raised her wand and shouted, Wingardium Leviosa! The club soared into the air and then came crashing down. She guided it to hit the troll square on the forehead with a ringing clang. The creature staggered, tried to rise, and Hermione, teeth clenched, made the club strike again and again, second, third, fourth, until the troll finally slumped, unconscious. Hermione fell back, panting. The others stared at her, stunned and impressed. She tried to play it cool, cheeks flushing. Well, she said to Padma, forcing a smile, you were right, punching it felt rather good. Padma was too astonished to speak. She glanced at Vade and Michael, a little unsure of what she'd just encouraged. Then Ron came barreling down the corridor, shouting, Harry, troll! There's a troll in! His voice cut off as he saw the scene. He stood gaping. What happened? 30. Professor's Ron shrieked, covering his face. You killed a troll! Harry looked around. Seeing that no one else was paying any attention to Ron, he said, No. Hermione stunned it. After a beat, he added without thinking, with a levitation charm. Earlier in Charms class, Hermione had been trying to teach Ron the proper way to do a levitation charm. Her instructive tone had only made him more resentful. Ron blinked, astonished. Hermione? How is that possible? That was a troll! Hermione made a small, proud sound and gripped her wand, part excited, part terrified. She stared at the motionless creature as if something had woken up inside her. Padma, peeking from behind V, whispered, Is it dead? No, Veed said, watching the troll's chest rise and fall. It's just stunned. Oh, good. Padma rubbed her chest, relieved. Footsteps thundered in the corridor. Professor McGonagall strode in first, her face pale. Professor Snape followed, his black robes billowing. Professor Flitwick came next, running as fast as his small legs would carry him. And finally Professor Quirrell, who, seeing the troll's rough feet, clutched at his chest and made a choking sound like someone about to faint. Snape shot a quick look at Harry, who was still standing a little dazed, then bent down to examine the troll. Flitwick cried out in his high, worried voice, Oh, Merlin! Are you children all right? We're fine, Professor, Michael said eagerly. Except the troll's smell almost made me sick. Flitwick patted him on the arm with delight. Well done, first years, facing down a troll. I dare say not everyone can say that. How did you manage it? Michael grinned and tried to sound modest. It was everyone's effort. Potter ran out and drew its attention. Snape turned his black gaze straight on Harry, and Harry immediately dropped his eyes, wishing Michael hadn't said anything. Ron glared at Harry with a mix of envy and admiration. We all used a flock of birds to distract it, and then Veed used a spell. Michael faltered and looked to Veed. Smooth path spell, Vide said. Right, the smooth path spell made it slip, Michael finished. Then Hermione used the levitation charm to knock it out. Flitwick clapped delightedly. Excellent teamwork, marvelous. Using simple spells to such good effect, I'll award each of you 5 points. Phileas! Professor McGonagall snapped. Her voice was so stern that Flitwick, all smiles a moment before, immediately went silent and stepped back. The witch in green swept a cold look over the students. Everyone who met her eyes lowered their heads, including Veed. Trolls are extremely dangerous creatures. Many adult wizards have been killed by them. The moment you encountered it, you should have fled and sought a professor. You were lucky this time not to be killed. McGonagall fixed Hermione with an icy stare. Miss Granger, Hermione trembled. McGonagall remembered Hermione had taken the afternoon off because she wasn't feeling well. Why are you here? She demanded. Hermione had probably never lied to a teacher before. Confronted like that, her mind went blank. She stammered, I thought I'd read about trolls in books, and I thought. Veed stepped forward and pushed Hermione just enough to interrupt the far from convincing explanation. That was ridiculous. Hermione wouldn't have come here to challenge a troll by herself. If anyone believed that, they were a fool. Veed had no intention of letting Hermione shoulder the blame for the troll getting into the castle. She felt better this evening and didn't want to miss the feast, Veed said calmly. We were heading to the Great Hall together. Padma and Hermione went to the lavatory while Michael and I waited. When we left, we encountered the troll. We should have fled. Everybody was just stunned. Fortunately, Harry Potter managed to draw its attention. All eyes turned to Harry again. He blushed, feeling unworthy of the praise. Michael looked at Vade with a new understanding and added, "Yes, he threw a bucket at its head and yelled for us to run. He was very brave." Snape sneered. "A bucket?" Harry's head felt like it was on fire under Snape's stare. He suspected that the Ravenclaws were exaggerating to deflect the professor's attention from any foolishness the others might have done. He kept his eyes down and wished he could disappear. "And you, Mr. Weasley?" McGonagall asked, turning to Ron. "Why weren't you in your dormitory, as you should have been?" Ron had been imagining how different things might have been if he'd gone with Harry, how he might have been the hero, how Hermione would look at him with respect. Now he was suddenly called on and had nothing to say. He froze. Snape's look grew sharper. To try to help his friend, Harry forced himself to speak. "Ron came to warn us about the troll." "Yes, we all heard it," Snape cut in with sarcasm, shouting in the corridor as if the troll wouldn't notice otherwise. "I suppose your textbooks mention that trolls have poor hearing? Has Mr. Weasley's book even been opened? And as for you, Mr. Potter, attracting the troll's attention with a bucket, really? I hope you haven't forgotten you are supposed to be a wizard." The two Gryffindors' ears burned with both shame and anger. Michael inwardly gave Vade a grateful thumbs up. If they hadn't explained, the professors might have been scathing with their mockery. He didn't know Snape's dislike of Harry was a constant. No matter who was present, Snape saw only Potter. McGonagall's anger cooled a little at Snape's intervention. "Since there are extenuating circumstances," she said, "I will not deduct any additional house points. I will inform Professor Dumbledore. Now go, back to your common rooms. The houses are enjoying the Halloween feast." The students hurried away. As soon as they were out of the professor's sight, someone stifled a laugh with a "pfft," and then the giggles spread until the corridor was full of relieved, nervous laughter. "Honestly, when I first saw that big bloke, I thought we were done for." Padma clung to Hermione's arm. "Hermione, you were so brave." Hermione's cheeks flushed. "I didn't think of anything else at the time. My head was completely on charm. I mean, luckily I'd only ever made textbooks float before." "Veed's smooth path spell was amazing." Michael waved his wand, still excited. "Smooth path spell. You have to teach me next time we study." "No problem." Veed turned to Harry. "Harry, don't mind Professor Snape's evaluation. Using a bucket was a good idea. Ordinary spells hitting a troll are like mosquito bites." "No wonder Michael's Petrificus Talus didn't work earlier. You didn't keep attacking it with spells," Harry mused. "But I don't think I've seen the 2 spells you used in Standard Book of Spells, Grade 1. Veed's already self-studied charms up to Standard Book of Spells, Grade 3, Michael said with pride. "He lives in the library and the study rooms, learning more spells than the rest of us put together, even though it's only been 2 months since term started." Harry felt a flash of shame. If Ron, Michael, or even Malfoy knew more spells than him, he could tell himself they'd learned some at home. But Veed and Hermione hadn't been exposed to magic before Hogwarts, and yet they were among the best of the new students. Had he been too lax in his studies? He watched the others chatting and laughing, and naturally he joined them, but Ron said nothing, trailing behind and feeling awkward. They reached a fork and the group split. Harry, Hermione, and Ron headed for Gryffindor Tower. Without Michael and the others to joke with, the 3 of them fell silent. They avoided eye contact and quickened their pace back to the common room. On the way back to Ravenclaw Tower, Padma tried to sound casual as she watched the path ahead. "Vade, can I learn that smooth path spell? It sounds really useful." "Of course," Vade said. "We have no classes tomorrow morning, so I can teach you then." "It might not be convenient in the common room." Padma glanced quickly at Michael. "Do you have a special place to practice spells?" She was only 11 and had tried to be indirect, but the hint still had to be handled delicately. Vade understood. He thought for a moment. "I'll ask the others, but I don't think they'll mind you joining." "Of course, welcome," Michael smiled. "That'd be great." Padma could hardly contain her excitement. She blushed and smoothed her robes. "I'd be honored." Outside the common room door, the eagle knocker intoned, "OTTFSEN, what is the next letter?" Michael, not much good at riddles, rested his chin on his hand and pretended to think, then gave up after 3 seconds. "What do you think, Veed?" "It's T," Padma answered. "Correct." The knocker chanted, then opened the door. "Why tea?" Michael asked as they went in, still puzzled. "Is it tea for troll? Does this knocker know we beat a troll today?" He mugged theatrically, and Padma laughed. "It's the first letters of 1 to 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. The common room was packed. It looked as if most of Ravenclaw had come down. Long tables had been set up near the fireplace, laden with food and drink. They were celebrating Halloween here for the second time, and it was even livelier than the Great Hall. No professors watching and forbidding this or that. Vidi noticed some usually reclusive students had stayed, tucked into corners. Decorations had been put up. A giant skeleton walked around and drew the occasional scream. Some students wore skull masks that emitted eerie cries. "Care for a bloody lollipop?" Terry offered Lisa with gusto. Vede pushed through the crowd and went straight back to his dormitory. The stench of troll still clung to him, and he wasn't hungry. Padma watched him go and bit her lip. He didn't eat dinner? Why isn't he coming to the feast? She worried she might have annoyed him and that he'd rather be hungry than stay with them. "Don't worry, it's nothing to do with you," Michael said, focused on piling food on his plate. Vede just doesn't like overly lively places. Padma breathed easier and, feeling peckish, began to eat. After they'd filled themselves to about 70 or 80%, they relaxed into conversation. "Oh, right, about your study group. When Vede asks the others tomorrow, make sure you put in a good word for me," Padma reminded him repeatedly. Okay, mission accomplished." Michael replied with a grin. He knew better than anyone that if Vade agreed, no one else would object. Theo and Ryan were easygoing and wouldn't refuse someone a friend proposed. Neville was timid and compliant. Michael himself thought he had no temper or fixed opinions. The only potential holdout might be Hermione, but Padma had just begun to build a good rapport with her. When Michael had first said new members must be approved by everyone, what he really meant was, if Vade doesn't agree, you can't bring someone in. The restriction lay with the other four. The SSC, although it seemed like a mutual support group, mostly benefited from Vade. His organized notes clarified obscure passages, his essay techniques let the others produce high-quality work quickly, and his spell practice helped them learn fast. Anyone who joined would quickly see the benefits. Gryffindor and Hufflepuff students tended to be enthusiastic. If they liked the place, they might bring more friends without asking, thinking they were helping. In reality, more people would only make things harder for Vede. He wouldn't refuse outright, but if the group became noisy and crowded, he might quietly disappear from the umbrella house and retreat somewhere quiet, as he had tonight. So Michael had to set rules, to restrain the two houses' enthusiasm and to have a polite way to refuse newcomers. The one exception, of course, would be Vede himself. He was the center of the group and could decide whom he wanted to help. Michael had never explained these calculations. For now, facing Padma's request, he only smiled and nodded, promising to do his best to convince the others. Vede returned to his dormitory to find an unexpected visitor, a house elf in a tea towel standing in the middle of the room, its large gray-green eyes fixed on him without blinking. He nearly cast a spell out of reflex, then relaxed when he recognized her. "Zoe, what are you doing here?" he asked. House elves considered it an imposition to appear before their masters except in the kitchens, so Vede had never before seen one wandering about the school. Zoe wrung her slender fingers and spoke in her tiny formal voice, referring to both herself and him in the third person. Vede Grey did not eat dinner. Zoe was a little worried. Zoe knows Zoe should not appear, but Zoe came anyway. Zoe wants to know if Vede Grey is feeling unwell. "I'm fine." Vede crouched down. "It's just that the troll made everything smell awful. I lost my appetite." "But not eating is bad for one's health," Zoe said seriously. Vede Grey gave Zoe a gift. Zoe likes it very much, and Zoe cares about Vede Grey's health. Zoe does not want him to go hungry. Vede glanced at the tiny pumpkin carriage dangling from her waist, its lantern light flickering. "All right," he sighed. "Could you bring me some fruit? Not jam or pudding, fresh fruit. I'll have some after my shower." "Yes, sir." Zoe nodded and vanished with a cheerful pop. When Vede came out of the bathroom, still damp, a basket of fruit sat on the table. Apples, pears, bananas, a few strawberries, and a bunch of glistening green grapes, all washed and still beaded with water. He took an apple, bit into it, and felt an unexpected rush of feeling. In his previous life, his mother had insisted on strict, varied, healthy eating, 12 different foods a day, she used to say, with vegetables and fruit especially important. After his rebirth at Hogwarts, the food was plentiful, but heavy on roasted meats and desserts. Vegetables were few and repetitive, and fresh fruit almost never appeared on the long house tables. As the juicy sweetness filled his mouth, Vedi made a decision. After graduation, he would travel east. Magic opened doors, but the East held the future and its own mysteries he wanted to see. Padma's admission to the SSC had gone through smoothly. No one objected. She was clever, generous, and beautiful. Her deep, soulful eyes made even Theo and the others blush. Hermione, meanwhile, had been spending more and more time in study because Vedi pressured her. In the last Transfiguration class, he had turned a mouse into a delicate little teapot, so finely formed it looked like an artifact on a shelf. Professor McGonagall praised him, saying he was already at a level to earn an O on the finals. Hermione knew Veed's owl had delivered a complete set of books, standard spells and intermediate transfiguration, from Diagon Alley, so despite being the top first year in Gryffindor, she felt she was falling behind. She had grown irritable from studying nonstop and snapped at Ron several times. Ever since she had floored the troll, Ron no longer complained. Now he actually looked forward to Hermione's guidance, because she was almost always right. Hermione had even tried to curb her habit of preaching by ignoring some of the Gryffindor's rule-breaking, which had improved her popularity a little. She and Harry had become close enough that Vedi heard her daily grumbles about him. There was a whole weekend to do the assignment, and he only wrote the title, she complained to Vedi. Only when it was due did he panic and say, "Hermione, let me copy your homework." "So did you let him?" Vedi asked, writing as he spoke. "No way." Hermione wrinkled her nose. "What good is copying? I only promised to check it once he finishes writing it." "Wouldn't that be more trouble for you?" Padma wondered. "That's how you learn," Hermione snapped. Then the two girls exchanged a look and moved on. By the time Padma finished her homework, only Neville was still nibbling at his pen. She tucked her parchment away and walked around the partition Vedi had installed in Umbrella House. He had put up a sky-blue dividing wall to separate the practicing area from the study side, 1 part for practice, 3 for studying, and enchanted a silencing charm along the seam. On the practice side, 2 rows of targets stood in front of a wall of mirrors that Vedi said helped them correct their movements. Michael kept setting targets alight with Incendio and then dousing them with Aguamenti. Theo alternated between slicing them with Diffindo and mending them with Reparo. Hermione was casting a dancing charm on a spider. Its slender legs flailed wildly. Ryan muttered Petrificus totalis at a curious gray mouse peeking out. It stiffened, only its tail twitching, then shot forward in a sudden burst and in midair seemed to turn into a little twig. V flicked his wand and the twig floated. He touched it with his wand tip and it reverted to a mouse. Petrificus totalis, he demonstrated. The mouse's paws and tail pressed close to its body, and it went rigid as a board, its black eyes wide. It dropped with a dull thud, like a pebble. Vedi released the spell and let Ryan continue practicing. He moved to Padma. "Do you want to learn the Smooth Path spell first, or practice other things?" Padma looked embarrassed and stuck out her tongue. "Actually, my Reparo doesn't always work." She had expected him to look concerned, but he simply tapped the nearby wooden target with his wand. It split cleanly down the middle. "Then let's start with Reparo. First, let me see your level." Her hand trembled as she lifted her wand. She realized with a warm certainty that coming here might have been the best decision she'd made since arriving at Hogwarts. She would learn so much. "Reparo," she said, and set to work. The weather had been getting colder, but the atmosphere at school had quietly heated up. Quidditch season had begun. Michael was a dedicated Quidditch fan. Last year, he had even watched the Quidditch World Cup live. The match had gone on for 5 days and 5 nights, he liked to say, and he repeated at least 7 times how Scotland had nearly won and how Canada had snatched the championship. Thanks to his endless enthusiasm, even Vedi could name famous teams now: the Heidelberg Harriers, the Vratsa Vultures, the Fitchburg Finches, and the no longer glorious Chudley Cannons. Michael would rant about plays too, the Hawkhead formation, the Porskov ploy, and all the brilliant moves and daring saves, but the moment he mounted a broom, he might as well have been made of lead. He was stiff and cautious, never much faster than a galloping pony, and he would not fly higher than 10 meters. Vidi often joked that by second year, when they were allowed to bring brooms to school, Michael would still be taking the stairs back up to Ravenclaw Tower, which was several times that height. Because Michael talked about Quidditch so much, on topics Vede neither understood nor cared about, Vede had recently taken to avoiding him. Hermione had gotten busier, too. Her desk had acquired a stack of Quidditch books because Harry was about to play his first match and was so nervous he could hardly eat. Their relationship had improved, and Hermione's way of helping Harry was to research obsessively in every book she could find. Vidi thought Michael should be talking to Hermione more. One liked to talk, and the other liked to listen, but the two houses' schedules didn't line up, and most of the time, Vede was still forced to endure Michael's Quidditch match reviews. Padma had joined their little group recently, though, and when she and Michael were busy chatting, Vede finally got some peace. Hogwarts was a huge puzzle of buildings. Finding a hidden corner was easy. Vede had discovered an empty classroom on the 6th floor near the library that opened onto a small ledge through the window. The ledge sat sheltered among taller roofs, out of sight from other windows, and kept safe from the worst of the wind. From there, he could see the Quidditch pitch, and beyond it, the trees of the Forbidden Forest. Tiny figures skimmed and looped above the pitch like busy bees. From the flashes of red and gold, it looked like the Gryffindor team was in practice. Hermione had said something about this in the Umbrella House yesterday. The Gryffindor captain, Wood, had lost his temper in the common room. He'd asked the whole house to keep Harry Potter's place on the team a secret, wanting to use him as a secret weapon. Evidently, the whole school already knew. Wood was convinced someone had leaked it and stared at the Gryffindors with harsh eyes every day, trying to find the spy. It had made a few girls cry. His glances fell on some who were seeing people from other houses, and they felt accused. Vidi watched the practice for a while. From his vantage point, the players looked disorganized. There were no neat figure eights or coordinated attacks. He frowned, wondering whether his eyesight had gone or the team was simply sloppy. He decided alchemy was more interesting. A flick of his wand and several small blue fireballs appeared out of nowhere and warmed his hands. He pulled On the Diversity of Species from his bag, borrowed from the library, transfigured a stone pillar into a cushion, and settled against the wall to read. He had been there some time when he heard footsteps. At first he paid no attention, then a familiar scent cut through the air. Garlic. Before he could think, Vede snuffed out his flame and reversed the transfiguration. He rose soundlessly and flattened himself against the wall behind a projecting brick. "What are you looking at?" a sharp voice said, low and frosty, as if someone were speaking right beside his ear. Vede froze, sure he had been discovered, but a second, tremulous voice answered. "It's Harry Potter, Master," the voice whispered. "He's training with his teammates on the Quidditch pitch." Vede realized with a cold jolt that he was only a wall away from Quirrell, and the thing attached to the back of Quirrell's head. He held his breath and shrank back, not daring to move. The whisper from the thing was full of bile. "Harry Potter," it said. "Yes, the boy who lived, the savior of the wizarding world. While I was nothing but a wandering shade, he stepped over my corpse and became a star. No doubt Dumbledore has high hopes for him." Quirrell sounded like Vede felt, cowering. "But Master, with Dumbledore there, I can't," he stammered. "You told me never to attract Dumbledore's attention." "Are you questioning me, Quirrell? Do you dare disobey?" the other hissed. Something was done to Quirrell then. A painful groan escaped him. "No, I wouldn't dare. I obey. I've always obeyed. Spare me," he begged, low and whimpering, rolling on the floor. After a time, the torment stopped, and his master spoke with venom. "Use your head, you idiot," the thing said. "He's going to play in a Quidditch match. He'll be flying 50 meters up. If he falls from his broom, who will suspect you? They'll think it was his own clumsiness. What's odd about a child who hasn't mastered a few spells dying from a fall?" Yes, I understand. I'll do it," Quirrell whimpered, trembling as he lay prostrate. tears on his face. After a long moment, Vede heard the Defense Against the Dark Arts professor rise, rustle his robes as if to compose himself, and then leave with heavy, measured steps. Only when the footsteps faded did Vede let out a long, shaky breath. Cold sweat soaked his back. 34. Professor Mori thump. Thump, thump. His heart hammered as if it would burst. His clothes were soaked through, the cold wind bit into him, and a chill had settled into his bones. Since his rebirth, this was the closest Vede had come to death. Don't be deceived by how casually first-year Harry Potter faces a fragment of Voldemort in the stories. Harry did that with the protection of his mother's magic. If it had been the Vede sitting on that platform, no matter how many spells he knew, being discovered by Voldemort would almost certainly have meant death. Reborn, Vede didn't fear death as much as the idea of dying for something absurd. Silenced because he'd overheard a villain's secret, discarded like anonymous cannon fodder. He could accept dying for a cause or for those he loved, but not for such a pointless reason. Worried that Quirrell might still be nearby, Vede had hidden on the secluded platform and, exhausted, fallen asleep propped against the wall. When he woke, it was almost dawn, and the sky still sat in the dim wash of early morning. The Quidditch pitch was empty. Walking along the shore of the Black Lake a short distance away was an older wizard with silver-white hair, probably a professor, though not Dumbledore. Dumbledore had a long white beard, and this man didn't. Vede didn't get a close look, but he didn't need to. As long as it wasn't Quirrell, he was relieved. He pushed himself up from the wall and swayed, lightheaded. His hand went to his forehead. He didn't feel burning hot, but his palm was alarmingly warm. Each breath seemed to scorch his nostrils. For a moment, he had the ridiculous sensation that if he set an egg beside him, his body heat could fry it. He pulled himself through a classroom window and staggered toward the infirmary. Most of the portraits in the corridor were asleep, but a red-haired wizard's painting lay propped against the wall, staring off in a vacant reverie. The portrait's eyes brightened when it saw him. "What's the matter? You look ill," the portrait chirped. "Why aren't you in your common room? Madame Pomfrey probably isn't up yet. Do you want me to wake her?" "Haha, just kidding. My portrait's not in her bedroom. Why aren't you saying anything? Talk to me. I hate being awake alone." Vede had no strength to answer. The portrait followed him through frame after frame, chattering on without pause as if oblivious to Vede's silence. It took until they reached a stretch of corridor without any portraits for the red-haired voice to give up. From a painting several doors down, it called, "You must not have many friends if you're like that. Come find me when you're better. I'll talk your ear off." Vede's head throbbed. Fever made the pounding inside his skull want to split it open. The portrait's nagging grated on his nerves and scattered his focus. Only then did he notice another set of footsteps in the corridor that weren't his own. The sound was close, too close. He froze. Thump, thump, thump. A pair of shoes appeared around the corner. "What's the matter, child?" a voice asked. Vade's thoughts crawled in his head. He couldn't answer at once. "Oh, you've got a bad fever," the voice said gently, and a hand pushed him forward. "Come with me. My office is nearby." Silver hair flashed before his eyes, and for a moment he let his guard down, thinking for an instant it might be Dumbledore. A few minutes later, Vede stood clutching an empty cup, steam still ringing his ears, and blinked at the wizard across from him. The man was not Quirrell and not Dumbledore. He seemed easily 80, wearing a dark blue robe over a muggle shirt and suit trousers. His short silver hair was neat, and, unexpectedly, he had no beard. His tie was perfectly knotted, a rarity among wizards, and a brass-rimmed monocle hung from his waistcoat pocket. He had found Vade in the corridor, brought him to his office, and pressed a sharp, warming potion into his hands. It worked, faster and better than anything from the infirmary. The fog in Vede's mind thinned. His head cleared, though his ears still felt oddly hot. The office was circular and lit as brightly as day by a dozen magical lamps. Shelves and tables were cluttered with odd objects, a golden hourglass that turned of its own accord, several small crystal spheres strung on a silver wire, their colors pulsing like a slow breath, a remarkably detailed miniature manor sitting on a cabinet where thumb-sized figures moved about, fetching water and cooking. The room even held Muggle technology, an oven, a refrigerator, a television, a washing machine, and a disassembled car engine laid out like a mechanical specimen. It was the strangest room Vede had ever seen. A radio sat on the desk, which the professor was fiddling with. A woman's bright voice spilled out the moment Vede arrived. Good morning, dear listeners and busy witches and wizards. A wonderful day begins with magic time. I'm your host, Glenda Cheetalk. First up, a new release from Celestina Warbeck. You stole my cauldron, but you can't have my heart. Oh, thank goodness, I didn't miss it. This is my favorite show, the professor murmured, smiling. He turned to Vede. Feeling better, child? Yes, much better, sir. Thank you. Vede cleared his throat. May I ask, who are you? I'm Professor Terence Mori, Alchemy. He smiled warmly. If you manage outstanding in charms, transfiguration, and ancient runes on your fifth-year owls, and at least good in defense against the dark arts, herbology, and potions, you could take my class in your 6th year. You're interested in alchemy, aren't you? Vede looked down. A well-thumbed book on the diversity of species peeked from the edge of his bag. He shoved it back in. Yes, Professor, I've been studying alchemy on my own. For someone at your age, you should probably start with the basics, Professor Mori said mildly. The magical syllabary, for example. I've memorized the magical syllabary, Vede replied. And the compendium of magical symbols, the runes dictionary, ancient runes made easy. I've read Introduction to Alchemy and Analyzing Alchemy by Nicholas Flamel. Professor Mori blinked, taken aback. It was unusual, astonishing even, for so young a student to have read Flamel and such advanced texts. He recovered with an impressed, slightly amused expression, clearly re-evaluating the boy before him. 35. Professor Mori and Alchemy. Alchemy is closely tied to ancient runes, one of the most difficult subjects to learn. Except for history of magic, most classes at a magic school emphasize practical application. Ancient runes begins with relentless rote memorization. Characters, glyphs, pronunciations, meanings. Ancient runes differs from modern languages in every respect, and there is no substitute for repetition when it comes to learning the fundamentals. Many students who opt for ancient runes never fully memorize everything, even by graduation. Ravenclaws are not known for poor memories. Even if Vede couldn't match Hermione, he had trained his memory deliberately, and his recall wasn't far behind hers. After 3 months of immersion in magic, his strong memory and his passion for alchemy let him absorb several books. He reinforced what he'd learned by repeatedly writing from memory until errors disappeared. Professor Mori watched him quietly for a moment, then began to question him about the books. He took out parchment and a quill and randomly asked Vede to write characters and short phrases in ancient runes. More than an hour later, the professor, still thinking of the boy as a child, had to admit Vede had not been lying. He truly knew everything he claimed. Alchemy is one of Hogwarts' toughest subjects, and Professor Mori's standards were severe. Fewer than 10 students in each year could choose it, and those who did were the very best. Mori said that if he called in his current 7th years, even the most outstanding among them would make 1 or 2 small mistakes on the questions he had just asked. Alchemy required a genius's imagination and creativity, plus an attitude more meticulous, rigorous, and exacting than the gears of a watch. Those qualities rarely coincided in a single person. And this was only a... Suddenly, Mori realized how little he actually knew about the student in front of him. What year are you in now? The old professor asked kindly. 1st year, sir, Vede replied. Mori fell silent again. Isn't ancient runes an elective for 3rd years? He mused. Yes, sir, Vede said, trying to keep from appearing boastful. Mori's expression softened. He drifted into memories of his own youth, his level at 16 when he'd begun studying alchemy, and of the remarkable wizards he had known, names like Dumbledore, Grindelwald, even Voldemort, and what they had been capable of as students. His gaze on Vede took on the look of someone spotting uncut treasure. What is your name? Which house are you in? He asked gently. Vede Grey, Ravenclaw. Vede looked up, sensing the change in Mori's manner. You really love alchemy, don't you? Vede? Mori asked, his tone suddenly much more serious. Yes, Professor. Vede answered with the earnestness he always brought to the subject. It's an extraordinary field. Its power could change the world. I may spend my life studying it. Then as a wizard, what do you think of Muggle technological inventions? Mori continued. The professor's study, its furnishings and apparatus, made clear what kind of answer he expected. Vede paused, considering carefully before answering. Muggle technology is advancing rapidly. Tools of production are constantly improving, and communication and information exchange have become far more efficient. These developments are changing the world. Wizards need to learn from, absorb, and integrate with these advances, or one day we will be left behind. It was what he truly believed. Magic still had wonders, but the disparities were stark. Wizard communication, owls, Muggle communication, instant mobile phones, and the internet. The wizarding population in Britain numbered around 3,000, and worldwide only several hundred thousand to a million. The Muggle population was in the tens of millions at least, and growing fast. On the battlefield, wizards had a few deadly curses. Muggles had machine guns, incendiary bombs, artillery, intercontinental missiles, and even toddlers could be handed a handgun. In the past, when Muggles were ignorant, secrecy was enough to keep wizards safe. In a future of ever more powerful technology, wizards would have to learn, adapt, and draw closer to the Muggle world to avoid being overwhelmed. He had other riskier ideas, but Vede restrained himself. He didn't want to ruin the favorable impression Mori now held of him by sounding reckless, by being written off as dangerously ambitious or worse. Professor Mori was satisfied with Vede's measured reply. "I teach 6th and 7th years on Mondays and Thursdays," he said. "If you have questions, come to my office then. If you keep your passion for alchemy, I'll be happy to spend 2 hours a week guiding you." Though Mori's words were careful, he surprised Vede by removing a book from his shelves, learning magical item creation from scratch, and handing it to him. He set the tutoring time for Thursday and then allowed Vede to leave. Walking out with the book, Vede glanced through the window at the black lake beside the forbidden forest, and a sudden memory struck him. When he had woken that morning, he'd seen a figure, silver-white hair, familiar features. Could that have been Professor Mori? His steps stopped. His scalp prickled and goosebumps rose. When had he seen that person? Had there been a 10-minute gap between that sighting and meeting Mori? The fever last night had scrambled his sense of time. If that figure had been Mori, how could the professor have reached Vede's location in only 10 minutes? Apparition was forbidden at Hogwarts. Mori was old and frail, and he wasn't the sort to speed about on a broom. If it hadn't been Mori, if it hadn't been Dumbledore, then who else could it be? Another professor Vede didn't know. The thought made his skin chill. "Is something the matter, Vede?" Mori's voice came from behind him. The kindness in it now carried an odd, faint edge. "Nothing." Vede surprised himself by sounding calm, even grateful. "I was just thinking how fortunate it was that you happened to pass by and found me this morning. Were you coming back from somewhere then?" "Of course not." Mori smiled as if the question were simple. "I usually don't live at the school. I only come through the flue when I need to teach. The fireplace in my office can connect to the flue network temporarily, special permission from the ministry. This morning, I just arrived at my office when I heard Griffiths shouting in the corridor. When I went out, I met you." The red-haired wizard idly tapped the picture frame, glancing now and then to see what the other portraits were doing. Students called this place the Astronomy Tower, because every week they climbed to the top to observe the stars in astronomy class, and most of the portraits in the hall had something to do with the night sky. They were mostly solemn and silent. No one wanted to talk to him. Footsteps sounded in the corridor. A familiar student passed by, and the portrait leaned forward to catch him. "Hey, are you over your cold? Mori gave you the medicine, right? That old man's restorative brew really works." Griffiths expected the student to keep walking without looking back, like everyone else had, but to his surprise, the boy paused and regarded him thoughtfully. "Are you Griffiths?" he asked. "That's me." The red-haired portrait brightened. "Mori told you, didn't he? He's the only one who comes by and chats with me sometimes." "Aren't there a lot of portraits here?" Vede gestured around the hall. "Oh, don't get me started," Griffiths replied miserably. "See that old man diagonally opposite?" Vede looked. The portrait showed an elderly wizard in a star-patterned robe and hat, standing before a large telescope and staring at an unchanging painted sky. He's been staring through that telescope for hundreds of years, watching the same painted stars, and the only thing he finds annoying is me. And Shalom, she's the one with glasses. She's forever bent over parchment, writing and calculating. Her equations were confirmed by Muggle scientists 100 years ago, and she still won't stop. Veed saw the thin witch hunched over stacks of parchment. She didn't even look up. And those little ones stargazing over there, see them? Like a mob of Cornish pixies, Griffiths continued. When they aren't staring at the sky or sleeping, they're tearing up the place, knocking over the old man's telescope, shredding Shalom's parchments, pulling my hair, spilling ink on my robe. It's unbearable. He gave a long, lonely sigh. Despite Vadi's bad mood, he couldn't help smiling a little. The portrait's gloom and complaints seemed to lift some of the heaviness in his own chest. How long have you been up here? Still haven't gotten used to it? You wouldn't believe it. I used to hang in the hall on the first floor, surrounded by portraits. I would watch the young wizards come and go all day, teach them pranks now and then. It was so much fun, Griffith said regretfully. Then they moved me up here to make room for Fosco's portrait. I thought it would be nice to meet new faces, but it's so dull. Can't portraits visit other places? Vadi asked. They can, but it's a big effort. I mostly stay put. Griffiths brightened with a hopeful look. Can you move my portrait back to the hall, or somewhere lively? I'll repay you. V didn't promise right away. I have to ask the professor first. If they don't object, I'll help you move. Griffiths hesitated. What if they object? Then I'll help you move secretly, somewhere not so obvious as the hall, Veed said. That's perfect. Griffiths almost bounced in excitement. Go ask quickly. Ask now. All right, Veedy smiled and turned to leave. He had meant to ask Griffiths whether Professor Mori had actually come out of his office that morning, and whether Quirrell came here often. But after a few more sentences, the thought slipped away. The red-haired wizard talked too much to be trusted with a secret, and he and Professor Mori had known each other a long time. Veed couldn't expect him to keep something quiet. Better to get the portrait moved first, then make plans. Professor Mori finally finished teaching the 7th years and stomped off grumbling, clutching his lesson plans. A few timid, quail-like students lingered behind, looking as if they'd just weathered a storm. What did he mean by first years are stronger than you? They muttered among themselves. Do first years even know what alchemy is? Do they know how to write 0 in runes? Unconvinced, they answered only with a meek, yes, you're right, under Professor Mori's stern glare. Mori's displeasure only grew after seeing the students he'd carefully selected and checking their previous alchemy work. He sent them off with 5 times the usual homework, yet still felt they were taking things too lightly. He huffed back toward his office and was greeted by a cheerful voice from the hall. Was class smooth today, Professor Mori? The young wizards must have learned a lot, right? It was hard to stay cold toward such enthusiasm. Mori couldn't help a small smile. Oh, Griffiths. Who else would it be? Griffiths replied. Mori lingered in the hall and found himself complaining about his pupils to the portrait. Even if they're not as quick-witted as others, they aren't even diligent. Why learn alchemy? Might as well go work at the ministry and be a decoration. So you've taken a liking to that young wizard? Griffiths asked, leaning on his frame with a grin. Mori fell silent for a moment, then he sighed. Talented wizards often show themselves early, bright, showy. Everyone notices them when they arrive. But those gifted ones always chase after dangerous, profound magic. They want greater power and grander pursuits, and few are willing to sit down and study alchemy. What good is mastering the world's most dangerous, forbidden magics? He went on. Look at those once famous names. Some fell like shooting stars, some became notorious dark lords, and some, despite fame, ended with nothing. The more power they had, the more death they brought. What can actually change the wizarding world and bring people real happiness is alchemy. Learning from muggles, innovating technology, improving alchemical products, that's how our world can develop. Only then can wizards avoid being swallowed by muggle progress. But these years, even with some successes introducing muggle inventions to the magical world, I feel like a child learning to walk. The closer I try to get to the giants ahead of us, the more hopelessly wide the gap seems, and it grows every moment. And my students? Their minds are set on inventing a few fashionable magical trinkets and making a fortune. That's all they care about. That child is different, though, isn't he? Griffiths interrupted suddenly. Yes, Maury smiled, even though he's only 11 years old. Veed had no idea Professor Maury had taken such an interest in him after only one meeting. He was simply thrilled that his fumbling attempts at alchemy might finally get some professional guidance. Back in the Great Hall, the 4 long tables were nearly empty. A few late risers ate breakfast at a leisurely pace. It was Sunday, so most students slept in, and the breakfast hour had been extended by half an hour. Veed grabbed 2 sandwiches and noticed West Moore, the Ravenclaw 6th-year prefect, sitting at the end of a table. He went over and sat beside him. "Morning, West," Veed said. "Morning, Veed," West answered lazily. "You're up early for once." Veed leaned closer. "Do you know who the school's alchemy professor is?" "Professor Terence Maury," West said. "I'm in his advanced class this year. Why? I'm interested in alchemy and wanted to catch up on it beforehand." Veed didn't mention his chance encounter that morning. "Which professor is Maury? I don't remember anyone saying that name when I first arrived." "Oh, Professor Maury hardly ever comes to school," West said, as if stating a fact. "He's not around for new student sign-ups or the Halloween feast. He's a renowned alchemist. People say he's second only to Nicholas Flamel. Of course, everyone idolizes Flamel, and there are half a dozen people called the second Flamel, but Maury isn't after fame. He actually has substance." West leaned in conspiratorially, lowering his voice with a hint of admiration. "He even owns shares in Nimbus and Wizard Radio, is a regular guest of Celestina Warbeck, and works with several ministries of magic. He's helped on at least 3 ministry reconstruction projects. Just last Halloween, he was at an alchemy symposium in Carcassonne. Only top-tier alchemists get invited." "So he's a busy man." West spoke more normally again. "So it's already lucky he can teach us once a week. He doesn't live at the school like other professors and rarely eats in the Great Hall. It's a smart move to start alchemy now. If you get into his class in 6th year, you could really impress him. Who knows, he might take on an apprentice and you'd be on the fast track." "What does on the fast track mean?" Benson's voice interrupted. He appeared as if out of nowhere. Hair mussed, a smear of toothpaste at the corner of his mouth. He grabbed a pie and began to pull West up. "Come on, let's go. If we're late, we won't get good seats." "Wait." West waved his wand and gave Benson a quick Scourgify. "The Gryffindor-Slytherin match doesn't start for another half hour. They're flying. It doesn't matter where you sit." "It matters," Benson protested, tugging West toward the door. "If all the seats behind the pillars are left, you'll miss the good bits. And I don't want to sit with Slytherin." He hauled West down the corridor toward the Quidditch pitch. West called back, "You'd better hurry too, Veed," but was already gone. Only then did Veed notice why the Great Hall seemed so empty. Most of the school had already gone to the pitch. He'd been so absorbed in everything that had happened since last night, he'd completely forgotten the first Quidditch match was today. He finished a cup of hot water that had appeared in front of him and walked out to the pitch. Almost the whole student body was there. Many held binoculars to see better. The stands rose in tiered banks. Ravenclaws and Hufflepuffs mixed with Gryffindors, while Slytherins clustered together. In the highest row, a huge banner flashed, "Potter will win," in changing colors, a vividly drawn lion emblazoned on it. Players streamed out of the locker rooms to cheers. The crowd, only a few hundred, but loud enough to fill a stadium, roared encouragement like fans at a championship game. Veedy pushed up to the highest tier and quickly picked out the professor's box. The professors preferred not to be jostled and gathered in a small enclave. Snape, a black figure among them, was easy to find. Quirrell sat near him, his head wrapped in its large scarf, watching Harry Potter on his broom with an odd, almost bashful attention. A faint flush colored his pale cheeks, as if the excitement had infected him too. Madam Hooch's whistle split the air. The players were up in the sky in an instant, specks against the clouds. The crowd stood instinctively, necks craned to follow the play, and Lee Jordan's lively commentary rose above the noise. "Flint couldn't get it. Wood, Gryffindor's keeper, makes a brilliant save." Veed slipped through the crowd toward the professors. Hidden by the students around him, he extended his wand and made a quick, practiced flick. He'd been thinking of something to influence the game, though he kept his intention to himself. Quirrell, applauding the goal, smiled along with the other professors and seemed to pay no attention to the dark-faced Snape nearby. Then, without warning, Quirrell lurched forward. He tumbled down the stand in a flurry of robes and startled shrieks, knocking several students over as he went. People rushed to help, and when they hauled him upright, 2 thin streams of blood ran from his nose. Professor Sprout bent over him, concerned. Quirrell clutched his face, bewildered and dazed. At that same instant, Lee Jordan's voice rang out, electric with excitement. "Harry Potter has caught the golden snitch. Gryffindor wins 170-20. What a match! The great Harry Potter, on his first match as Seeker." The crowd erupted, cheering and jumping and chanting Potter's name. Quirrell, his face streaked with blood, turned at the sound, eyes fixed on the celebrating Gryffindor team. His face suddenly hardened in a way that didn't fit the jubilation. For a moment, he looked grim and almost fearful. The cheering swallowed the change up, but not entirely. Snape, pale as ever, was staring at Quirrell with a very different kind of intensity. Vidi, a few rows behind and screened by the human throng, slipped his wand back into his robes. He watched Quirrell for a long beat, then melted into the stream of cheering students and made his way back to the castle. 38. Learn to understand to control. Ever since he had overheard Professor Quirrell in conversation with the pendant Voldemort, Vidi avoided those secluded, empty corners of the castle. When he didn't have classes, he spent most of his time in Umbrella House. Luckily, Michael's obsession with Quidditch had finally cooled, probably after Ravenclaw lost to Hufflepuff in a match where 2 students were injured. He'd decided Quidditch wasn't as fun as he'd thought. In defense against the dark arts, Veda watched Quirrell carefully. With the students, he remained the same timid, pitiable man. When someone mischievous asked about the time he fell in the stands, the professor stammered, I didn't notice. It seems. Someone pushed me." The others looked skeptical. Which student would dare play a prank on a professor? Most assumed Quirrell had been overly nervous and slipped and was too embarrassed to say so. No one suspected Vide. He had a reputation as a model student, respectful, studious, never troublesome, a proper Ravenclaw. After class, Padma hurriedly packed her bag and bounded over. Going to Umbrella House to do homework? Quirrell wasn't an inspiring teacher, but he was relentless with homework, assignments that went on for pages and gave Ravenclaws headaches. Yet Padma had acquired a knack for essay writing in that environment, and she oddly enjoyed it. Perhaps finishing quickly and watching classmates groan over how much and how difficult the homework was made her feel superior. Vede had seen her boasting in the Great Hall more than once. "How much have you got left?" Still a lot? I finished mine in 40 minutes yesterday. It was easy. How haven't you even written the introduction? Didn't you listen in class?" After a few rounds of that, everyone stopped trying to talk to her, so Padma stuck close to Parvati. From the look on Parvati's face, she tolerated Padma mostly to borrow her homework. Vede half wanted to tell Padma not to be so boastful, but Michael, watching the smile on Padma's face from the other end of the long table, said, "Don't you think she's adorable like this? Her face is just screaming, 'Aren't I amazing? Come praise me.'" He smiled without meaning to, both silly and smart, like a little kid. Vede swallowed the retort. Maybe he was too old-fashioned or too practical to appreciate childish display. Padma was eager to go to Umbrella House, and Michael was winking at Vede as if to invite him along. Vede glanced back, then shook his head. "You two go ahead. I need to ask Professor Flitwick something." Michael was overjoyed, giving 2 thumbs up. Padma was a little disappointed, but shrugged. "Fine." They left together. Vede packed his things and climbed to the 7th floor. He really did need to see Flitwick. Flitwick's office sat high, where students rarely went, so the corridor was quiet except for the occasional mutter from the portraits. Vede had never seen another portrait as active as Griffith's. Most portraits did little more than stretch or turn their heads. Some never left their frames at all. The oak door set into the wall had an eagle carved on it. The carving seemed to regard him, fluttered its wings, and murmured, "Vede Grey has come to visit." A moment later, the carving said, "Permission to enter." The door slid open and Vede stepped in, Flitwick's office was very Ravenclaw, arched, with 13 windows looking out over Ravenclaw Tower and the Owlery. Sunlight filtered through stained glass, splashing colors across the floor. Nearly all the furniture was miniature, matching Professor Flitwick's own size, but the bookshelves were grand. Shelves of books rose from floor to ceiling, with stacks of parchment piled thick on the floor. Many were the professor's notes, carefully organized and sometimes lent to favored pupils. Vede already had 2 in his bag. "Oh, Vede!" The professor's voice came from above. Flitwick stood on a tall, self-gliding ladder, which retracted in sections until it became a low step, and he hopped down with a grin. "I'm very pleased with your essay on the softening charm, my boy. Any new questions today?" "Yes." Vede took out the borrowed notes. "I've finished Standard Book of Spells, Grade 3, and I'd like you to test me." "Of course. First, cast a cheering charm," Flitwick replied brightly. Over the next while, Vede demonstrated more than a dozen third-year spells, each one working cleanly on the first try. The professor got so excited he was nearly faint with delight. Oh, Vede, you're a genius. It's only been 3 months. I watched you go from nothing to this. Your progress is extraordinary. At this rate, you'll be at OEL level in less than a year. You'll be an exceptional wizard, I'm sure of it." Vede smiled. "Professor, may I borrow the Grade 4 textbook and some of your notes?" "Of course, I had them ready." Flitwick waved his wand, and several books flew over from his desk. They were Flitwick's own Standard Book of Spells, Grade 4, well used, along with reference materials, lesson plans, and outstanding essays left by former students. He had taught at Hogwarts for decades. He hardly needed more than a wand to teach, but he never threw those early writings away. He kept them, organized, and occasionally updated them even now. Vede's eyes let him learn spells quickly. But there was a difference between learning a spell and mastering it. With the same flame-freezing charm, one wizard might only manage to light a cigarette, while another could set a bonfire ablaze, and a very powerful one could incinerate a city. That was a difference of power. In terms of control, some people's flame-freezing charm would blacken their own faces unpredictably, while others could command the flame, shape it, burn with it, and douse it at will. The reason for that difference wasn't only raw magical power, it was the wizard's understanding of the spell's essence. Vede's eyes let him learn. Textbooks and the library helped him understand. Professor Flitwick's materials put him on the verge of control. 39. Griffith's Farewell Ceremony. After borrowing the books, Vede kept peppering Professor Flitwick with questions. The charms textbook went into great detail, but Vede wanted to know about spells that came up in defense against the dark arts. The shield charm, Expelliarmus, the impediment jinx. Flitwick could have told him to ask Professor Quirrell, but instead he answered patiently and thoroughly, and even lent Vede a few more volumes at the end. Vede was deeply grateful. Hogwarts was the only magic school in Britain. The professors didn't work to KPIs, publish pass rates, or take part in year-end performance reviews. They taught as they saw fit. Some were diligent and conscientious, others drifted through their responsibilities, and a few taught whatever took their fancy, blissfully indifferent to the fact that their pupils still had to sit wizarding exams. As their conversation wound down, Vede remembered Griffith's request. "Professor," he said, "there's a portrait that complained it was too lonely and asked me to help move it somewhere livelier. Is that possible? Is it a portrait with a duty?" Flitwick asked. Some portraits had duties, the fat lady guarding the Gryffindor common room, for example, and couldn't be moved. Vede shook his head. "No." He said he used to be in the hall, but he was moved to the astronomy tower to make space for other portraits. "Oh, I know who you mean." Flitwick smiled. Griffiths was moved because a lot of portraits complained he disturbed their sleep, and he even incited Peeves to prank ministry officials when they came to inspect the school. The head and the staff thought he needed a lesson, so he was banished to one of the loneliest spots here. "And his request?" Vede asked tentatively. "Loving a bit of excitement isn't a crime," Flitwick said with a twinkle. "So long as he promises not to send Peeves off to cause trouble all over the place, you may move him. The Great Hall, though, will be difficult. Many of the portraits there take a very dim view of Griffiths." Griffiths did not agree. He darted about inside the frame, defending himself. I don't see why pranks are so hated. They bring people joy, he chattered as Vidi took down the portrait. Then, true to form, Griffiths made a last glorious mess of his farewell. He spun the old astronomer's telescope around a full 180 degrees, snatched the bespectacled witch's quill and inkwell, poured ink over one mischievous child's head, and shoved a quill up another's nostril. The surrounding portraits, no matter how far away in the castle, poured in after him and set upon the red-haired wizard. Vede could only watch, helpless, as the portraits overwhelmed Griffiths. The bespectacled witch, who had always been precise with her calculations, kicked him fiercely. "Do you know how long I've been calculating?" she screeched. "How long?" The naughty children treated him like a trampoline, bouncing and stamping and yelling. The old stargazer finally reached him and delivered 2 heavy blows, then limped away, clutching his back. Portraits could not be interfered with, and so Vede waited until the skirmish broke up. When it did, Griffiths lay in the painted grass like a sodden heap. A footprint still marked his forehead, and his robe was torn. He smiled up at Vede, breathless with laughter. "You don't understand," he said as he rolled over, a shoe print still visible. "A quiet leaving is forgettable. No tears, no fuss, they'd forget me. I wanted everyone to end it happy. A good rough and tumble, and then everyone's merry at the end. Isn't that perfect?" Vede frowned. "So you wanted everyone to have fun, and for only you to get hurt?" Griffiths burst out laughing. "Vede, you've got a sense of humor after all." As they watched, the damage in the portrait unwound itself. Footprints vanished, his robe mended, trampled flowers straightened, branches regrew on the trees. Only the bruises on his face did not entirely fade. "You must have been a Gryffindor," Vede said as he rehung the portrait on the corridor wall. "Of course. You can tell at a glance, can't you?" Griffith said, peering around the frame. "Where is this?" "You can't go back to the hall," Vede replied. "This corridor is the passage from the Great Hall to the library. Almost every student walks past here every day. That should be lively enough for you." "Not bad, not bad," Griffiths was content. Other portraits in the corridor watched the newcomer with curiosity. Some leaned together and whispered war. Just then, Hermione walked by with a pile of books, and Harry and Ron matched her step. The 3 looked like they had just come from the library and were arguing in low voices. "I'd bet my broom Snape let the troll in. He wants to steal whatever's guarded by Cerberus," Harry said breathlessly. "No, he wouldn't," Hermione snapped. "You can't accuse a professor like that without proof." "Honestly, Hermione, you always think the teachers are saints," Ron retorted. "I saw him. When the troll appeared, I went to find you 2, and I saw Snape sneaking up the stairs. Harry saw his leg bleeding from a bite. How can you ignore that and trust him just because he's a professor?" "I don't trust him because he's a professor," Hermione said fiercely. "I trust Dumbledore. If Snape were a bad person, Dumbledore would have noticed ages ago." She stomped off, no longer willing to argue. "Hey, Vede, you coming to study? Let's go together," she called. Vede nodded. Okay." Hermione's tone left no room for refusal. He gave Harry and Ron a quick nod and fell into step with her. "Unreasonable, right?" Ron grumbled under his breath as they walked away. "Couldn't Dumbledore be fooled by Snape? Even the greatest wizards have been tricked." Harry stared ahead in silence, convinced of Snape's guilt. "Good afternoon, students." A warm voice came from the portrait on the wall. "You're all Gryffindors, I see. I'm a Gryffindor, too. I'm Griffiths, and you are." Ron muttered, "This is Harry Potter, and I'm Ron Weasley. We haven't met you before." "That's because I just moved in today," Griffiths chirped. "Weasley and Potter, those names sound familiar. I must have known people with those names before. Ancestors, perhaps?" Harry, who had been brooding over Snape, now looked intrigued. The trio's earlier argument forgotten, Harry and Ron fell into an animated conversation with the portrait. 40. Weasleys. Besides charms and transfiguration, Vede spent most of his time on alchemy. While working through alchemy, he also deepened his understanding of several other subjects. The book Professor Mori had lent him, learning to create magical items from scratch, was nothing like a normal alchemy text. It contained almost no dry history or abstract theory and didn't waste ink on elaborate discussions of elemental correspondences. From the very first line, it dove into methods: how to make self-inking quills, moving photographs, flying brooms, howlers, and rarer items, pensieves, magic mirrors, invisibility cloaks, animated armor. It even mentioned the sorting hat and the time turner, though the latter only in conjecture, with no concrete manufacturing process given. Of course, the items listed weren't things you could build by simply following the book. It was like handing someone a complete manufacturing manual for a computer when they had no idea what electricity or programming were. Without the right foundations, the steps would be meaningless. Magical devices were far more complex and dangerous than mere machines. Without the corresponding knowledge, even the simplest procedures might as well be gibberish. Vedi spent several weeks studying under Professor Mori, sitting in on critiques of 6th and 7th year work and helping to build a teaching aid for the class. After a period of training, Mori suggested he try making the simplest items himself. Combining 3 to 5 spells could yield surprisingly effective devices. Self-inking quills and howlers were within reach, he said. Ideas came to Vedi easily: a quill that automatically switched ink color while writing, glasses that measured distance, a dancing puppet. As soon as the ideas formed, the spells and steps flashed into his mind. The required enchantments and runes were all basic ones he already knew. A few practice attempts, and he could make any of them. But he hesitated. Would his work be any different from the student projects Professor Mori dismissed as trash? Would it be little more than a derivative, hurried assignment destined for the rubbish heap? This was his first alchemy project. He didn't want it to be casual. That night, Vedi's thoughts buzzed, and he never slept deeply. Half awake, he heard rustling, sat up, drew his wand, and with a flick lit the oil lamp beside his bed. The dormitory was quiet. Faint sounds came from outside the window. He put on his clothes and went to look. Snow was falling, feathery flakes drifting down, turning the castle into a hushed white world. The snow smoothed the mess of the grounds and gave everything a peculiar stillness. Then an idea struck him so clearly that all the other notions he'd been entertaining suddenly seemed gaudy and trivial. He went back to bed in a good mood and slept through until morning. Vedi had thought that his own act, smashing Quirrell until his face bled, was extreme, but the Weasley twins had topped him. They had enchanted several snowballs, so they chased Quirrell and eventually smacked him on the back of his head. Professor McGonagall stormed out of the Great Hall, furious, and docked the twins a full 30 points from Gryffindor. She also gave them a month's detention, half before the Christmas break, half after, and wouldn't hear their excuses. Fred and George put on faces of repentance and apologized solemnly, but the moment McGonagall was out of sight, they were all grins and high spirits. "Why pick on Quirrell?" Vedi asked, curious, as they stood in the corridor. To someone who knew the truth, their prank had been pure daring, practically sticking a hand into a tiger's mouth. The Weasleys were pranksters, sure, but they usually wouldn't provoke a professor. House points mattered, and Gryffindor falling behind was a national embarrassment. Even if Quirrell had arrested 200 points in a single go, most students would just shrug. When had Fred and George gotten so reckless? The twins looked him over, then suddenly remembered. "Oh, that's you. From the library. What's your name again?" they asked together. "Veed Grey, Ravenclaw," he said. They brightened. Ron had mentioned the name often. Every time Ron came back from a class down the corridors, he talked, envious and impressed, about a young wizard named Veed in their year who was admired by professors, surely the next Percy. But from what they'd seen, Veed Grey wasn't a Percy at all. He was more like them, into alchemy, practical and sharp. They liked him instantly. The twins exchanged a look, then leaned in conspiratorially. "Aren't you curious?" "Quirrell always wears that scarf," Fred began. "No matter the weather, he never takes it off," George added. "We asked the house elves in the kitchens. They won't even touch it to clean it. So there must be something he's hiding under that scarf, something he can't let anyone see," Fred declared. "Maybe it's some dark arts thing that's warped his mind. Or maybe it's an incredibly ugly, scabby head," George laughed. "Imagine it. We'd all die laughing." "Don't pick on Professor Quirrell just because he seems meek," Veed said in a mock Hermione tone. "Do you dare pull down Professor McGonagall's bun?" "Don't say such terrifying things," Fred said, putting his arm around Veed's shoulders in a familiar, friendly way. "Listen, we found something odd. Did you notice?" "What?" George asked, playing straight man. Fred looked at Vade and drew the word out. We talked about how weird Quirrell's scarf is, and you don't seem curious at all. Something clicked in Vede. He realized the twins' casual teasing hid a very sharp instinct. His expression shifted subtly. George caught it and raised an eyebrow. So, you already know? Vede crossed his arms, leaned back against the wall, and narrowed his eyes. So, is this an interrogation? Fred and George exchanged a look and laughed together. Of course not. You already found the answer before we did, so we've lost this one, Fred said with mock solemnity. But as for interrogations, no way. We'll find out ourselves. George flashed a brilliant grin.